Okay, this is the daily money-making setups for the S&P E-mini, and it's using the 1500 tick bar chart. And the chart from Thursday, May 17th. Now, normally the way that we do the setups is I just mark up all the setups and I show you exactly how the trades would have transpired and where the probabilities would have been in your favor and why the system works so efficiently. But this time I thought I'd do it just a little bit differently. And what I would do is ask you, well, take a second here and tell me or decide for yourself exactly where would you like to get in. Let's say we're going to take 3 trades. What 3 trades, at what point would you like to take those trades? Well, I think that we're probably going to end up taking the same trades or very close to the same trades. And on this day, we're going to end up taking 1 trend trade, 1 contrarian trade, and 1 discretionary trade. And I may go through this one a little bit faster because I already recorded this session and it failed to save properly. So now I'm doing it once again. And so let's go ahead and start. I imagine that you said you would have liked to got in right here. If you're like everybody else, you want to get in at the lows and get out at the highs, or get in the highs and go short to the lows, etc. So this is where I assume that you'd want to get in. And in the processtrading.com right edge trading system, we're going to get in right here because it's going to be a trend trade. Remember, in the processtrading.com system, when the VWAP here, which also acts as support and resistance, when the VWAP here is yellow, you can take a trend trade to the long side anytime you have a timing alert dot below the price bars. And the way that you do it is you use a trade management technique of the associated bar with the timing alert dot. You look at the high and you place your order entry 2 points above that. And that would have got you in right at this doji right here. Now, the whole essence of process trading and its success is that we buy into strength and we sell into weakness. And this is one of the ways that we do it, is with trend trading. When you place your order entry 2 points above the trend trade, in order for that trend to continue, it's got to have strength. And it comes up, it hits your strength, you're buying into strength, and it continues through it. Now, how we take that trade and get all the points all the way up to this point is another matter, and we're going to see that right now. So, because the VWAP was yellow, we had a timing alert dot. We used our trade management technique. We got into the trade right here. We would have also psychologically been more satisfied with the trade because we see that on the Intergy, which stands for internal energy, we have demand coming in. The green bars essentially represent demand. The gray bars essentially represent weakness, whether they're to whichever side of the histogram they're on. And then the red bars indicate supply. And you can see that coming in here, and then this little bit of supply here. So at this point here, we see demand had come in and started to come in way back here. And then we look down at probably one of the most important indicators of the system, which is the sentiment oscillator, which has the momentum line, which really is the impulse energy or the impulse buying, either long or short. And in this case, we see that the momentum comes up through the bottom of the oscillator and cuts through the midline. And most importantly, it cuts through the sentiment line. And you can also think of the sentiment line as conviction. So we have a strong tendency to the upside with conviction following through. Then we look down at our other indicator, which is a short-term trend oscillator, and we see it also coming up through the bottom of the oscillator. It comes up to the pullback line and goes through the pullback line, comes back to the pullback, that's why it's called the pullback line, and then continues on higher. You can see over here, and we will see this when I take this trade over here too, that it went up to the pullback line, came down, up to the pullback line, came down. Is the same thing over here. That's why this is not just a midline between the high and the low of the oscillator. This is, in fact, a pullback line, and that's the way you want to interpret it. So we got into the trade right here, and we can see there is energy in that trade all the way over here as well. When we look at the conviction or the sentiment to it, the sentiment line crossed the upper bound and stayed in clear over to here. It stayed over the upper bound over to here, and we saw the short-term trend oscillator. Once it hit the pullback line and continued up, it went across the upper bound and started to slope up. When the short-term trend oscillator does that, it's another very strong sign that you're in a strong trending trade. The last thing I want to say about this is these two dots also kept us in it. These are trending dots, and these trending dots tell us when a trend is possibly underway. And we look at those and we use that as additional information when we're reading our other indicators, and it gave us a even stronger sentiment then to stay in the trade to the long side. Now, right at this point here, you see that energy had waned and it had some weakness here. But that's normal for a trading because the price had gone up. The buyers had taken it up. Right in this point here, the sellers say, okay, that's the top. That's the end of it. And they try to take it down, and they can't do it. And then more demand comes in. And all this demand here is just absorbed all this selling here and got even better prices. And then that same scenario, the shorts are guessing again here, trying to take it down, and they get caught again, and then it finally goes up to here. Now, in this area here is where I expect that you said, well, that was where I want to take one of my three trades. So probably here, and here would be your next one. You probably say, well, yeah, I'd like to take that to the downside. How could you do it? Well, with the ProcessTrading.com right edge trading system, these lines right here, these two white lines, form what we call contrabands. And those bands are for contrarian trades. The way that those contrarian trades work is that they are managed almost the opposite of a trend trade. These contrarian trades, you get into them as soon as possible when you recognize them. And you can recognize them when price goes above the band, the contrarian band. When price goes above that, and you get a timing alert dot. That's essential. You got to have a timing alert dot. Also, you want to remember there's a number of times when if you're taking a contrarian trade, you might be taking it in the middle of a strong uptrend, and you want to just make it a scalp trade. And in fact, this morning I did take this trade, and this was good for 1 point here. Then I also took this trade, which I expect is where you said your second place is that you like to get in. Well, we can see that this is another good high probability trade because it's above the contrarian line. That means you're going to get in quickly when you identify it because it has a timing alert dot. And then you're going to set your stop loss at a half a point to 2 points above the high here. You're going to might give it a little bit of range to run, but you want to have a fairly tight stop because the whole point of these contrarian trades is that they're low risk and high probability. So in this one, we bought into strength using our trade management. And in this one, we're selling into weakness using our trade management. And we know that that weakness is happening immediately. We know that that's occurring because as we look down to the sentiment oscillator, we see it cutting down through the upper bound at a severe angle. And then we see the sentiment is coming out of the trade. In other words, the conviction is gone away as well. And you can see that because the sentiment line is cutting down through the upper bound and starting to angle down. And we know the nature of the sentiment oscillator is to go from the upper bound to the lower bound and continue that pattern from the lower bound to the upper bound and then back down again. So we know that this is a strong indication that supply is taking over. We also know that at this point because the short-term trend oscillator is now itself cut down through the upper boundary and is starting to slope down. Over here we see it cuts through the pullback line, which is also significant. Now, right in here, we see that the process trading VWAP line, where it is yellow over here, which means you can trade to the long side, and gray over here, which means you can trade to the downside with the timing alert dots. This area right here is support and resistance. So we see that it hit actually support right there, and there's a small battle going on between supply and demand. But we're going to look down at our discretionary indicators and see if we can get an idea of how that's going to turn out. Well, we see supply still in here, and now we have a trending dot here. We don't know if that's going to be to the upside or the downside, and then we start to see demand coming in. So if you simply make the error of looking at one indicator alone, which would be the internal energy here, then you could say, oh, it's showing me a trending dot and demand is coming in, so it's going to go to the upside. But when we look at the sentiment oscillator, which is probably the most vital oscillator of the system, you know the nature of it going from high to low, and you see that it is on a downward slope. So you're not going to go against that downward slope. You're going to let it play out. So now we know that that's consolidation, but it's likely going to play out to the downside because the slope itself is the sentiment line is sloping down and has not shown it's going to change yet. As well, again, the short-term trend hit the pullback line and came back, and then it hit the pullback line and came back and went below the lower boundaries. And actually, that's what makes this oscillator unique. These also form channels. You can see the upper boundary here, and then the lower boundary right here starts to slope down. That's an important indicator that you're more in a trending situation, just like it was over here. So we're going to stay with that. That's why we don't get fooled by that. So that was our contrarian trade. So we've taken a trend trade and a contrarian trade, and then I'm just guessing that you're going to say, well, this would be where I would want to get in my third trade. Now, this trade is going to be our discretionary trade. It didn't reach our criteria for being a contrarian trade. We're not taking it to the downside or taking a short here, so it definitely is a trade in the opposite direction. It is a contrarian trade, but not by the rules, not because it hit a contraband, but because we're using our own discretion. Now, when we do that, we're going to have to look at the discretionary indicators. The discretionary indicators have some very important features here. First, the price bar has a trending alert dot here. We don't know right now if that trending alert dot means it's going to keep going down or it's going to go up, but we think that a trend could be in progress here. When we go down to the energy, we see energy right here, and we have another trending alert dot. So we have two trending alert dots. You don't see that anywhere else over here. So you have to give that some weight and some significance when you're making your decision and trying to analyze the situation. But most importantly, we look down here at the sentiment oscillator, where the momentum line is now cutting up through the bottom of the oscillator, and the sentiment line itself has hit the bottom and now is starting to trend upward. As well, we look down at the short-term trend oscillator, and it's coming up. The slope downward has leveled off here, and the short-term trend line is starting to come up through the bottom. So this is clearly a change in the discretion of the trading community, and they're going to take it to the upside. And we see that in the energy is starting to wane and go towards positive energy. Now, in taking this trade, it's a discretionary trade. So you're going to use your own discretion as to how you want to get into it. You could have entered into it as a trend trade and you would have been successful. You could have entered into it through the trade management of a contrarian trade and you would have been successful. Whatever you do here, you're using your own discretion for entries here. But the whole point still is, as the process trading philosophy, you want to buy into strength, which is what we're doing here. And so you're going to take this trade, and then you're going to continue to monitor the discretionary indicators because of taking a discretionary trade. And you see now the sentiment line is starting to slope up severely. The momentum line clearly shows that momentum is high now. Demand is starting to come in. You have another trending alert dot here associated with the green bar. So it likely is going to go to the upside. We don't see anything else down here that tells us contrary. The short-term trend has changed from red to green and is still sloping up. So I imagine this would be your third trade. And if you go back and look, this trade here would have been good for 10 points. This trade here would have been good for about 18 points. And this trend here would have been good for about 10 points on the S&P E-mini 500. So that's the way I thought we'd do it today, just so to show you that the system is going to probably identify the same trades that you would take and show you why there are good probability trades and how to trade them with low risk. So that's it. And if you want to see these, this is a daily thing where we show the setups on the S&P E-mini over on processtrading.com. But if you want to get them directly come to you, hit the subscribe button. And if you want to see the whole system, go over to processtrading.com and you'll see all the documentation. You can read the blogs, you can see the daily setups, you can see the results, etc. And if you have any questions, you can just use the contact form for feedback. So until the next daily setups, that's it. And I hope we had the same trades, and I hope all your trades are successful.